The words came out of her 6-year-old son's mouth in a whisper so quiet that Imani almost missed them over the sound of running bathwater. She was kneeling beside the tub in their upstairs bathroom, testing the temperature with her hand, when Caleb tugged on her sleeve and leaned close to her ear. "Mommy," he whispered, his small voice trembling. "Daddy has a lover, and they're going to take all your money." Imani's hand froze in the water. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. She turned slowly to look at her son, this beautiful child with his father's deep brown eyes and her own high cheekbones, and saw fear written all over his face. Not the fear of a child who had done something wrong, but the fear of a child who had seen something he did not understand and knew instinctively that it was dangerous. "What did you say?" "Hey, baby," Imani asked, her voice carefully steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Caleb's bottom lip quivered. "I heard Daddy talking on the phone in his office. He didn't know I was there. I was looking for my robot toy and the door was open a little bit, and I heard him say it. He said the money would be gone soon and she would never know." Imani pulled her son into her arms, holding him close, feeling his small body shake slightly against hers. Over his head, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. Imani Rochelle Patterson was 38 years old, a registered nurse who worked 3 12-hour shifts a week at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. She had been married to Terrence Patterson for 9 years, together for 11. They had 2 children, Caleb, who was 6, Wynn and Maya, who was 3 and currently napping in her room down the hall. And until this exact moment, kneeling on the bathroom floor, with her son's words echoing in her ears, Imani had believed her marriage was solid, her family secure, and her future predictable in all the best ways. She had been wrong. Now, before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you are already feeling that knot in your stomach, if Caleb's words hit you the same way they hit Imani, then hit that subscribe button right now. Here is something most people do not realize. Over 70% of the people watching Philly Folktales videos right now have not subscribed to this channel. They watch, they feel every emotion, they get completely invested in these stories, and then they leave without joining our community. Do not be one of those people. I'd subscribe right now and become part of the Philly Folktales family. Smash that like button too, because it genuinely helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. And drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Are you in Atlanta like Imani? New York? Chicago? London? Amsterdam? I want to hear from every single one of you. Because what Imani does next, the way she handles this betrayal while protecting her children and her future, is something you will never forget. Imani did not confront Terrence that night. She gave Caleb his bath, read him 2 stories, tucked him into bed, and kissed his forehead while promising him that everything would be okay. She checked on Maya, who was still sleeping soundly in her toddler bed, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. Then she went downstairs to the kitchen where Terrence sat at the table scrolling through his phone, and she made herself a cup of tea with hands that only shook slightly. Terrence looked up and smiled at her, the same warm smile that had first caught her attention 11 years ago when they met at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was handsome, her husband, tall and lean with smooth dark skin and a voice that could make even mundane conversation sound important. He worked as a financial advisor at a firm downtown, wore expensive suits, and drove a car that cost more than Imani made in 6 months. They lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. From the outside, they had built exactly the kind of life people dreamed about. "Kids down?" Terrence asked, setting his phone face down on the table. "They are," Imani said, sitting across from him with her tea. "Caleb had a good day at school. Maya's getting over that cold finally." They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Schedules, groceries, the fact that the lawn needed mowing, normal married conversation. And the entire time, Imani watched her husband's face and wondered how long he had been lying to her, how long he had been planning whatever he was planning, how long she had been living in a version of reality that existed only in her own mind. When Terrence went upstairs to shower, Imani sat alone in the kitchen and made a decision. She was not going to fall apart. She was not going to confront him without information. She was not going to let fear or heartbreak cloud her judgment. She was going to find out exactly what was happening, And then she was going to protect herself and her children with everything she had. The next morning, after Terrence left for work, and she had dropped Caleb at school and Maya at daycare, Imani called in sick to her shift at the hospital. Then she drove to a coffee shop across town and made 3 phone calls. The first was to her best friend since college, a woman named Zora Nichols who worked as a paralegal at a law firm. The second was to her older brother Elijah, who was a police detective in Decatur and had connections to people who could find information others could not. The third was to a divorce attorney named Patricia Okonkwo, who had been recommended to her by a colleague at the hospital who had gone through a difficult separation 2 years earlier. By noon, Imani had an appointment scheduled with Patricia for the following week, a promise from Elijah that he would help her however he could, and Zora sitting across from her in the coffee shop, holding both her hands across the table. "Tell me everything," Zora said, her dark eyes sharp with concern and focus. So Imani did. She told her about Caleb's words, about the phone conversation he had overheard, about the sick feeling that had been growing in her stomach ever since. The feeling that something had been wrong for a while, but she had been too busy, too trusting, too comfortable to see it. Zora listened without interrupting. When Imani finished, Zora sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "First thing," Zora said, "you did the right thing by not confronting him yet. Confronting without information just gives him time to hide things, to gaslight you, to cover his tracks." "I do not even know what I am looking for," Imani admitted. "An affair? Financial fraud? Both?" "Probably both," Zora said grimly. "If Caleb heard him talking about money being gone and you not knowing, that suggests he is moving assets, which means you need to act fast." "How fast?" "Yesterday fast. Men like Terrence, men who work in finance, they know how to hide money. They know how to make things disappear on paper while keeping them accessible to themselves. You need to get copies of everything. Bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, tax returns, everything. And you need to do it before he knows you are looking." Imani felt the weight of what she was facing settle onto her shoulders. "When I have access to our joint accounts. But Terrence has accounts I am not on. Business accounts," he always said. "I trusted him to handle the finances." "That trust is about to become your biggest problem," Zora said gently. "But it is not too late. Here is what you are going to do." Over the next hour, Zora laid out a strategy. Imani would quietly gather every financial document she could access. She would check their home computer for saved passwords or financial files. She would review their tax returns from the past 3 years to see what income and assets had been reported. She would document everything, photograph everything, and store copies somewhere Terrence could not access or delete them. And she would do all of this without giving Terrence any reason to suspect she knew something was wrong. "Can you do that?" Zora asked. "See, can you go home tonight and act normal while you are investigating your own husband?" Imani thought about her children, about Caleb's frightened whisper, about Maya's innocent trust that her world was safe and stable, about the life she had worked so hard to build and the future she had believed was secure. "Yes," Imani said, "I can do that." That evening, after the kids were in bed, Imani told Terrence she was going to catch up on some paperwork from the hospital and the home office they shared. Terrence barely looked up from the basketball game he was watching. Imani went into the office, closed the door, and spent 3 hours going through every file, every folder, every saved document on their desktop computer. What she found made her blood run cold. There were bank statements for accounts she had never known existed. Transfers of money, large amounts, being moved regularly from their joint savings account into an account at a different bank under only Terrence's name. Investment portfolios she had never seen. And buried in a folder labeled Work Miscellaneous were email exchanges between Terrence and a woman named Kennedy Ashford. The emails were not explicitly romantic, but the intimacy was unmistakable. Inside jokes, mentions of dinners and weekend trips that Terrence had told Imani were work conferences. And in one email from 3 weeks ago, a message that made Imani's hands shake as she read it. "Once the accounts are transferred and the house is refinanced, we will have everything we need. She will not be able to touch any of it. Then we can start fresh." Imani sat back in the office chair, staring at the screen, for feeling like the floor had opened up beneath her. Terrence was not just having an affair. He was systematically moving their assets, hiding money, preparing to leave her with nothing. and he was doing it with the help of someone who clearly knew exactly how to make it happen. She took screenshots of everything, every bank statement, every email, every document. She uploaded them to a cloud storage account Terrence did not know about and emailed copies to herself at an address she created that day. Then she carefully closed every file and folder exactly as she had found them and deleted her search history from the computer. When she came out of the office an hour later, Terrence was still watching television. "Get what you needed done?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "I did," Imani said, and she went upstairs to check on her children, to stand in their doorways and watch them sleep, and to promise herself that no matter what it took, she would protect them from the devastation their father was planning. The meeting with Patricia Okonkwo happened on a Wednesday afternoon while the children were at school and daycare. Patricia's office was in a high-rise in Midtown, modern and professional, and the woman herself was exactly what Imani needed. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with a reputation for handling complex divorces involving hidden assets and financial manipulation. Imani brought everything: printed screenshots, bank statements, the emails, documentation of every asset she knew about, and every transfer she had discovered. Patricia reviewed it all methodically, making notes, asking questions, and occasionally letting out small sounds of recognition that suggested she had seen this pattern before. "Your husband is engaging in what we call dissipation of marital assets," Patricia said finally, setting down the last document. "He is deliberately moving money out of your reach in preparation for a divorce he has not told you about yet. The good news is, you caught it before he could finish. The bad news is, this is going to get complicated." "How complicated?" Imani asked. "Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, but fair division requires knowing what assets exist. If Terrence has hidden money or moved it into accounts you do not know about, we have to find it and prove it belongs to the marriage." "Can we do that?" "We can," Patricia said. "Sure, but we need to move quickly. I want to file for divorce immediately and request a freeze on all marital assets. That will prevent Terrence from moving any more money before the court can review everything. I also want to request forensic accounting. We will bring in experts who can trace every dollar and find anything he has hidden." Imani's head was spinning. "This is really happening. I am really getting divorced." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "You are protecting yourself and your children from someone who was planning to leave you with nothing. That is not failure, Imani. That is strength." Imani felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past week. Now was the time to be strategic, to be strong, to fight. "What do I do next?" she asked. "You go home and you act normal. Do not let Terrence know you have been here. Do not confront him. Do not tip your hand in any way. Give me 3 days to prepare the paperwork, and then we will serve him. Once he is served, you need to be ready for his reaction. Some men get angry. Some get defensive. Some try to manipulate. You need to stay calm, document everything, and let me handle the legal strategy." "What about my kids?" Imani asked, the question that had been haunting her since the night Caleb whispered his secret. "We will fight for primary custody and child support commensurate with Terrence's actual income, not the income he has been hiding. And we will make sure the custody arrangement protects them from being caught in the middle of this." Imani left Patricia's office feeling both terrified and empowered. She was about to blow up her entire life. But she was doing it on her terms, with information, with a plan, with the support of people who knew how to fight this kind of battle. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, Terrence was served with divorce papers while he was having coffee in the kitchen. The process server handed him the envelope, confirmed his identity, and left before Terrence fully understood what had happened. Imani was upstairs with the children when she heard him shout her name. She had been expecting this. She had prepared for this. She went downstairs slowly, her heart pounding but her face calm, and found Terrence standing in the kitchen holding the papers, his face a mask of shock and fury. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "Divorce papers," Imani said calmly. "I am filing for divorce, and I am requesting that the court freeze all marital assets pending a full accounting." "Are you out of your mind?" Terrence's voice rose. "You cannot just—" "I can," Imani interrupted. "And I did. I know about Kennedy. I know about the money you have been hiding. I know you have been planning to leave me with nothing, but you underestimated me, Terrence. You thought I was too busy, too trusting, too focused on the kids to notice. You were wrong. Terrence's expression cycled through shock, denial, anger, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Imani, listen to me. No, Imani said, her voice steady and strong. I am done listening to you. I have listened for 9 years. I have trusted you. I have supported you. I have built a life with you. And you repaid that by stealing from me and planning to abandon your family for someone else. You do not get to explain this away. You do not get to gaslight me or manipulate me or make me doubt what I know is true. She took a breath, steadying herself. You will hear from my attorney. Until this is resolved, I want you to move out of this house. You have 1 week. You cannot kick me out of my own house, Terrence said, his voice hard. Our house, Imani corrected. And yes, I can. My attorney filed an emergency motion for exclusive use of the marital home pending the divorce. The court granted it this morning. You have 1 week, Terrence. After that, I will have you removed. She turned and walked back upstairs, her legs shaking but her head held high, and she did not look back. Terrence moved out 6 days later, taking his clothes, his computer, and very little else. He did not speak to Imani beyond what was absolutely necessary, conducting all communication through terse text messages about when he would be at the house to pack and when he wanted to see the children. Imani maintained her composure throughout, responding only to logistical questions and refusing to engage with the angry, accusatory messages he sent late at night when he had clearly been drinking. The hardest part was explaining things to Caleb. Maya was too young to fully understand why Daddy was not living with them anymore. Accepting Imani's simple explanation that Mommy and Daddy needed some space, and Daddy would still see her lots. But Caleb was 6, old enough to sense the tension, to remember what he had overheard, to ask questions that broke Imani's heart. Or is it my fault? Caleb asked one night as Imani tucked him into bed. Did I make Daddy leave because I told you his secret? Imani sat on the edge of his bed and pulled him into her lap, holding him close. No, baby. None of this is your fault. You did exactly the right thing by telling me. You were brave and honest, and I am so proud of you. Daddy made choices that hurt our family, but those were his choices. Not yours, never yours. Do you still love Daddy? Caleb asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Imani thought about how to answer that. She had loved Terrence. Deeply. She had loved the man she thought he was, the partner she believed they were building a life with. But that man, she was realizing, had never really existed. Or if he had been replaced somewhere along the way by someone willing to lie and steal and abandon his family without remorse. I will always care about your daddy because he gave me you and Maya, Imani said carefully. But grown-up love is complicated, and sometimes people change in ways that mean they cannot be together anymore. What matters is that Daddy loves you, and I love you, and nothing that is happening between Daddy and me changes that. It was the best answer she could give, and she hoped it would be enough. The forensic accounting began 2 weeks after Terrence was served. Patricia had hired a firm that specialized in uncovering hidden assets in divorce cases, and they went through every financial record with meticulous precision. What they found was worse than Imani had initially discovered on her own. Terrence had been systematically siphoning money from their joint accounts for over 2 years. He had opened credit cards in both their names without her knowledge, maxing them out and then hiding the statements. He had taken out a second mortgage on their house, again forging Imani's signature, and funneled that money into accounts only he controlled. He had cashed out part of his retirement account early, paying the penalties, and moved the remaining funds where Imani could not access them. In total, Terrence had hidden or moved nearly $300,000 of marital assets. Money that should have been building their children's college funds, securing their retirement, giving them financial stability. Money that Terrence had instead been preparing to take with him when he left. Patricia presented all of this evidence to the court in a motion that was both comprehensive and damning. She argued that Terrence had engaged in fraud, forgery, and deliberate dissipation of marital assets with the intent to deprive Imani of her fair share. She requested that the court not only freeze the assets, but ordered Terrence to return the money immediately and award Imani a greater share of remaining marital property as compensation for his misconduct. The hearing was scheduled for late October, 3 months after Imani had first filed. Those 3 months were some of the hardest of Imani's life. She worked her shifts at the hospital, exhausted by 12-hour days on her feet, but grateful for the routine and the paycheck. She took care of her children, holding them close, reassuring them. She creating as much stability as she could in the midst of upheaval. She attended meetings with Patricia, with the forensic accountants, with the custody evaluator the court had appointed, and she dealt with Terrence's attempts to manipulate the situation. He tried everything. First, he denied everything, claiming the accountants were wrong, that Imani was lying, that he had no idea what she was talking about. When that did not work and the evidence was too strong to refute, he tried to blame Imani, saying she had been irresponsible with money, that he had been trying to protect their assets, that she had forced him into this by being unreasonable. When that also failed, he tried to use the children, showing up at unexpected times, lavishing them with expensive gifts, promising them things he could not deliver, when all while painting Imani as the villain who had broken up their family. Caleb saw through it almost immediately. He was a perceptive child, and he remembered what he had heard, what he knew his father had been planning. When Terrence tried to tell him that Mommy was being mean and unfair, Caleb looked at his father and said simply, "You lied, Daddy. I heard you." Terrence had no response to that. Maya was more easily swayed by the gifts and promises, and that hurt Imani more than she wanted to admit. But she reminded herself that Maya was 3 years old, that she would not remember most of this, that what mattered was giving her stability and love now, so she could grow up healthy and whole. Zora was Imani's lifeline through all of it. She came over several nights a week, bringing takeout, helping with the kids, sitting with Imani on the couch after the children were asleep and just being present. She did not offer empty platitudes or try to minimize what Imani was going through. She just showed up consistently and without judgment, and that meant everything. "You are the strongest person I know," Zora told her one night, after they had put the kids to bed and were sitting in the living room with glasses of wine neither of them was really drinking. "I do not feel strong," Imani admitted. "I feel like I am barely holding it together." "Holding it together while your world falls apart is the definition of strength," Zora said. "You did not fall apart when Caleb told you. You did not fall apart when you found the evidence. You did not fall apart when you served Terrence. You have been strategic and smart, and you have protected those kids every single day. That is not just holding it together, Imani. That is warrior-level strength." Imani smiled despite herself. "Warrior level, huh?" "Absolutely. You are out here fighting a man who thought he could steal your future and get away with it. And you are winning." The hearing in October was brutal but definitive. Patricia presented the forensic evidence, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the pattern of deception that went back years. Terrence's attorney tried to discredit the findings, tried to argue that the transactions were legitimate financial planning, tried to paint Terrence as a responsible husband who had been trying to secure his family's future, but the evidence was too strong. The forensic accountants testified. The bank records spoke for themselves. And when the judge asked Terrence directly to explain the forged signature on the second mortgage, Terrence had no answer that made sense. The judge ruled decisively. All marital assets were to be frozen immediately. Terrence was ordered to provide a full accounting of every asset and account in his name within 30 days. The court appointed a special master to oversee the division of property and ensure that no additional assets disappeared. And most importantly, the judge stated clearly for the record that Terrence's conduct constituted fraud and dissipation of marital assets, which would weigh heavily in the final settlement. Imani sat beside Patricia in the courtroom and felt something shift in her chest. Relief. Vindication. The knowledge that she had been right to trust her instincts, right to investigate, right to fight. Outside the courtroom, Terrence tried to approach her. "Imani, please, can we talk?" "No," Imani said simply. "We have nothing to talk about that our lawyers cannot handle." "You are destroying me," Terrence said, his voice edged with desperation. "Do you understand that? You are destroying my reputation, my career, my life." Imani looked at the man she had once loved, the man who had fathered her children, the man who had been planning to leave her destitute, and she felt nothing but cold clarity. "No, Terrence," she said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you did not take me and our children down with you." She walked away and did not look back. The final divorce settlement took another 4 months to negotiate, but when it was done, it was everything Patricia had fought for. Imani was awarded primary custody of both children, with Terrence receiving supervised visitation until he could prove he was providing a stable environment. She was awarded the house, her car, and 60% of all remaining marital assets in compensation for the assets Terrence had dissipated. Terrence was ordered to pay substantial child support based on his actual income, not the reduced figures he had tried to claim, and he was ordered to pay Imani's legal fees, which had mounted into the tens of thousands. The court also ordered that Terrence could not introduce the children to any romantic partner until they had been in a relationship for at least 6 months, and the court had been notified. That provision was specifically designed to protect Caleb and Maya from being paraded through a series of their father's relationships. And Imani was grateful for it. When the final papers were signed in March, more than 9 months after Caleb had first whispered his secret, Imani sat in Patricia's office and felt the weight of the past years settle and then lift. "You did it," Patricia said, smiling. "You protected yourself and your children, and you came out of this with your future intact." "I could not have done it without you," Imani said. "Without you and Zora and Elijah and everyone who helped me through this." "But you did the hardest part," Patricia said. "You had the courage to act when it would have been easier to stay quiet and hope things got better. You trusted yourself when you could have talked yourself into believing the lies. That takes strength most people do not have." Imani left the office and drove home to the house that was now legally entirely hers. The house where her children were waiting with the babysitter, where they would grow up safe and loved and protected. And for the first time in a year, Imani let herself cry. Not tears of grief or anger, but tears of relief and release. She had survived, more than survived. She had fought and won. The first year after the divorce was finalized was a time of rebuilding in ways both practical and emotional. Imani focused on creating stability for her children, on establishing new routines that did not include waiting for their father to come home or wondering where he was or who he was with. She redecorated the house, changing things that had been chosen by Terrence or that carried too many memories of the marriage. She painted walls, bought new furniture, created a space that felt entirely hers. She also focused on her own healing. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma from emotional abuse and financial manipulation. It took several sessions before Imani could even use the word abuse to describe what Terrence had done. She had thought of abuse as something physical, something obvious. But her therapist helped her understand that what Terrence had done, the lying and the financial control and the gaslighting, was its own form of abuse, designed to keep her dependent and unaware while he built a separate life. "You were not stupid or naive," her therapist told her during one session. "You were a trusting partner in what you believed was an honest marriage. The person who violated that trust is responsible for the violation, not you for having trusted." Those words helped more than Imani could express. Caleb thrived in the new normal. With the tension of his parents' failing marriage removed, he became more open, more confident, more willing to talk about his feelings. He still saw his father on scheduled visits, and while those visits were sometimes awkward, the court-ordered supervision meant that Terrence could not manipulate or badmouth Imani in front of the children. Slowly, Caleb was able to build a relationship with his father that was separate from the betrayal of the marriage. Maya adjusted more easily, being younger. She accepted the new arrangement without questioning it too deeply, and she flourished with the increased stability and attention from Imani, who was no longer stretched thin, trying to manage a failing marriage on top of work and parenting. Imani also reconnected with parts of herself she had lost during the marriage. She started painting again, something she had loved in college but had set aside when life got busy. She joined a book club with women from her church. She took a weekend trip with Zora to Charleston, just the two of them, laughing and talking and remembering what it felt like to be a person separate from mother, separate from ex-wife, just Imani. About 18 months after the divorce was final, Imani heard through mutual acquaintances that Terrence's relationship with Kennedy had fallen apart. Apparently, Kennedy had expected Terrence to come into the relationship with substantial money and assets, and when the court settlement left him with much less than he had planned, And when the legal fees and child support obligations ate into his income, Kennedy had decided she was not interested in struggling through a financial rebuild with a man who had proven himself to be dishonest and manipulative. The karma in that was not lost on Imani. Terrence had destroyed his marriage and his family for a woman who was only interested in what she thought he could provide financially. And when those finances disappeared, so did she. Imani felt no satisfaction in Terrence's struggles. She had moved past anger into something more like indifference. He was her children's father, and for that reason she wished him well enough to be stable and present in their lives. But he was no longer a central figure in her emotional world. He was just someone she had to coordinate with regarding school schedules and holidays. 2 years after the divorce, Imani met someone. His name was Julian Micah Owens. When he was 42, a high school history teacher and basketball coach, with a warm laugh and kind eyes and a gentleness that immediately put Imani at ease. They met at Caleb's school during a parent-teacher conference week. Julian was there for his niece, whose parents both worked evenings and had asked him to attend in their place. He and Imani started talking in the hallway while waiting for their respective appointments, and the conversation flowed so easily that they exchanged numbers before parting ways. Julian asked Imani to coffee a week later. She almost said no. She was not sure she was ready, not sure she could trust anyone again, not sure she wanted to open her heart to the possibility of being hurt. But something about Julian's straightforwardness, the way he asked directly and without games, made her say yes. They took things very slowly. Julian had been through a difficult divorce himself years earlier and understood the importance of patience and clarity. He did not push for more than Imani was ready to give. He was honest about his life, his work, his own past mistakes and lessons learned. He asked about her children but did not try to insert himself into their lives too quickly. He respected boundaries and communicated clearly and showed up when he said he would. After 6 months of dating, Imani introduced him to Caleb and Maya. Not as Mommy's boyfriend, but as Mommy's friend Julian. She watched carefully for any signs that the children were uncomfortable, but Julian was a natural with kids, easy and playful without being overbearing, and both children took to him gradually and naturally. A year into their relationship, Julian asked Imani if she could see a future with him. Not a proposal, just an honest question. Could she see herself building something lasting with him? Imani thought about it carefully before answering. She thought about how different this relationship felt from her marriage to Terrence. There was no mystery about where Julian was or who he was with. No hidden bank accounts or secret phone calls. No gaslighting or manipulation. Just honesty, respect, partnership, and a genuine effort to build something together as equals. Yes, Imani said. I can see that. They got engaged 2 years after they started dating, and they married in a small ceremony the following spring. Just close family and friends, including Zora as maid of honor, and Elijah walking Imani down the aisle. Caleb and Maya participated in the ceremony, both of them excited to have Julian officially joining their family. Terrence, to his credit, handled the news with maturity. He told Imani he was happy she had found someone who treated her well, and he was kind to Julian during the awkward first few interactions when they overlapped at the children's school events or sports games. It seemed that Terrence had done some of his own work in therapy and had come to terms with the consequences of his choices. 3 years after marrying Julian, Imani received an unexpected phone call from Terrence. He asked if they could meet for coffee, just the two of them, to talk. Imani was hesitant but agreed, mostly out of curiosity. They met at a neutral coffee shop on a Saturday morning. Terrence looked older than Imani remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, under the confidence that had once defined him replaced by something quieter and more uncertain. I wanted to apologize, Terrence said once they were seated. A real apology, not the defensive explanations I gave during the divorce, but an actual acknowledgement of what I did and the harm I caused. Imani listened without interrupting. I was selfish and arrogant, and I convinced myself that what I was doing was justified, Terrence continued. I told myself you did not appreciate me, that Kennedy understood me better, that I deserved to be happy even if it meant destroying our family. I was wrong about all of it, and I am sorry. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. Imani sat with his words for a moment before responding. I appreciate you saying that, and I forgive you, Terrence. Not because what you did was okay, But because I refuse to carry anger toward you for the rest of my life. You are my children's father. We will be connected forever because of them, and I want that connection to be as healthy as possible. How did you do it? Terrence asked quietly. How did you come out of that whole situation and build such a good life? Most people would have been destroyed by what I did. But you thrived. Imani thought about how to answer. I did not thrive in spite of what you did. I thrived because I refused to let what you did define me. You made choices that hurt me deeply, but those were your choices, not mine. I chose to protect myself and our children. I chose to fight for what I deserved. I chose to rebuild. And I chose to believe that I was worthy of real partnership and real love. Watch, those choices shaped my life more than your betrayal did. Terrence nodded slowly, tears visible in his eyes. The kids are lucky to have you. They are lucky to have both of us, Imani said gently. Flawed, imperfect, doing our best. That is all any parent can be. They finished their coffee and parted ways amicably, and Imani drove home to the life she had built, the family she had protected, the future she had fought for and won. 5 years after Caleb first whispered his secret, Imani stood in her backyard watching her children play. Caleb was 11 now, tall and thoughtful and doing well in school. Maya was 8, bright and energetic and filled with opinions about everything. Julian was at the grill, preparing dinner, and Zora and Elijah were sitting at the patio table, laughing about something. It was a simple moment, an ordinary Saturday evening, but it was also everything Imani had fought for. Safety, stability, love, a home built on honesty and respect, children who were thriving, a partner who saw her and valued her, and walked beside her as an equal. Caleb came over to where Imani stood, slightly breathless from playing tag with his sister. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, noticing the tears in her eyes. "I am perfect, baby," Imani said, pulling him into a side hug. "I am just happy." "Because of the barbecue?" Caleb asked, confused. "Because of all of it," Imani said. "Because of you and Maya and Julian and this life we have. Because we are here, together, and we are okay." Caleb smiled and hugged her back. "We are better than okay, Mom. We are great." And he was right. They were. One Imani Rochelle Patterson had been betrayed by the man she trusted most. She had been faced with the possibility of losing everything she had worked for. She could have been crushed by it, broken by it, left with nothing. But she had listened to her child's whispered warning. She had trusted her instincts. She had fought strategically and fiercely for herself and her children, and she had come out the other side not just surviving, but genuinely thriving. The karma in her story was not that Terrence suffered. It was that Imani won. She won her freedom. She won her security. She won the right to build a life defined by her own choices rather than someone else's betrayal. And that victory, quiet and hard-won and entirely hers, was worth more than any revenge could ever be. Later that evening, not after the children were in bed and Julian was cleaning up the kitchen, Imani sat on the porch in the warm Georgia night and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The fear and the pain and the uncertainty. The strength she had not known she possessed. The people who had shown up for her when she needed them most. The choice, made over and over again, to keep moving forward even when the path ahead was unclear. She thought about that night 6 years ago, kneeling by the bathtub, hearing her son's frightened whisper. She thought about how easily she could have ignored it, dismissed it, talked herself out of believing it. But she had not. She had listened. She had acted. And that choice had changed everything. Imani pulled out her phone and sent a text to Zora. "Thank you for being there through all of it. I could not have done this without you." Zora's response came quickly. "You absolutely could have, but I am glad you did not have to. Love you, warrior." Imani smiled and put the phone away. She sat in the quiet for a few more minutes, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of Julian humming in the kitchen, and she felt a deep, abiding peace. She had survived the worst betrayal of her life. She had protected her children. She had built a future on her own terms, and every single day, she woke up in a life worth fighting for. That, she thought, was what real victory looked like. Not destruction of the person who hurt you, but construction of a life so good, so full, so genuine that the hurt becomes just another part of your story rather than the defining chapter. Imani had been the underdog, the woman who was supposed to lose everything, but she had refused to accept that script. She had rewritten her own story with courage and intelligence and relentless determination, and the ending she created was better than any revenge could ever be. It was forgiveness, it was freedom, it was love, it was home, and it was hers.